Another Star Wars product, another controversy. It's like it's a magnet for these kinds of problems, as Andor Season 2 has kicked off full steam, releasing 3 episodes on the same day, which, be my guest I suppose, that's not going to do a whole lot for viewer retention. It's just going to encourage people to binge these 3 episodes and probably not come back for later, but be my guess, and I assume this is probably a warning of what's to come or a sign that they have little faith in the product. But that's not really the big issue. The big issue is a lot of people are incredibly angry at the ending of episode 3, which includes an attempted rape. Now, I'm not one of these Puritans, I'm not one of these weirdos who says you can't have that in a Star Wars based product, but some people are. And it's creating enough of a controversy that you have to wonder what exactly is going through the heads of those over at Disney. Why they would decide to put attempted rape into a property generally made with the child market in mind. Now, I'm not saying this is the end of the world, I'm not saying this is a huge deal, but I'm just a little confused as to the why. And I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that this doesn't belong in Star Wars like some people are. So before we go any further, like, subscribe, and let's get into this. So coming from The Hollywood Reporter, Andor creator explains that shocking assault scene were all the product of rape. That's how he words it. He thinks that he can justify it by saying that all humans are the product of rape, which is a very incendiary statement, and I'm going to admit, it's being used a little maliciously. This isn't an accurate depiction of exactly what he said, though he did directly say these words. So Disney Star Wars acclaimed Andor that has stretched the creative boundaries of Star Wars in countless ways, bringing a grown-up sensibility to a galaxy far, far away, and more importantly, doing everything in its power to not look like Star Wars or be like Star Wars. Yet, even by Andor standards, a scene from the second season is leaving fans shocked. An Imperial officer tries to violently rape a rebel fugitive, Bix Kalleen, Adria Arjona, who is hiding out in a farming settlement while Imperial troops are rounding up undocumented citizens. Dude's doing his damnedest to shove as much contemporary politics into the galaxy far, far away, which, in case we haven't noticed, is exactly what keeps killing these sci-fi products, is shoving the modern day. By shoving current day, contemporary problems that will likely not be here for very long, it makes zero sense to put in your show because all you're going to do is date it. The sequence plays out over the course of the show's 3rd episode. The first 3 episodes were released all at once on Tuesday, with the officer's flirtation with Bix growing increasingly persistent and eventually accumulating with a brutal life and death struggle. Bix eventually gets the upper hand, and officer is killed, but Andor boldly leaves zero ambiguity as to what viewers just witnessed, as Bix screams, "He tried to rape me!" Now, terrible and on-the-nose writing aside, that doesn't fully capture the full picture of the scene, so I went over to Fandom Pulse to have the rest explained. However, when he, being the officer, returns the second time, he has discovered that Kalleen, aka Bix, and her compatriots are illegal. He attempts to use this as leverage against her and begins attempting to seduce her. However, she rejects him and a struggle ensues, with Kroll attempting to force himself on her. Kalleen eventually kills him, striking him in the face with one of her tools because she is an illegal farm worker. She works the grain, illegally, because this show has absolutely no clue how to make an allegory. Also, what is up with this shitty, hyper-realistic looking sci-fi stuff insisting on grain? But even ignoring the cringe setup, the poorly designed scene, why the fuck is she going out there and just screaming, "He tried to rape me"? Is there no more nuance you can put in your show? No more improved writing, no other tricks, no other way to word it? You had to do, "He tried to rape me"? Is that really the best that you've got? Now, the Star Wars franchise that has never, in film form, shown even consensual sex during its first season, Andor pushed the envelope with a scene that suggested sex was about to take place, or just had, much like old Hollywood films during the Hays Code censorship era. When asked about the big scene, Andor creator Tony Gilroy explained to The Hollywood Reporter that when telling a story about a war, shying away from sexual assault didn't feel truthful. Now, despite the fact that it looks pretty bad for him, he does try and come in here with a little bit of an excuse. I get one shot to tell everything I know, or can discover, or that I've learned about revolution, about battles, with as many incidents and as many colors as I can get in there, without having the story tip over, says Gilroy. I mean, let's be honest, man, the history of civilization, there's a huge arterial component of it that's rape. All of us who are here, we are all the product of rape. I mean, armies in power throughout history have committed rape, so to not touch on it in some way, it just was organic and it felt right. Coming about as a power trip for this guy, I was really trying to make a path for Bix that would ultimately lead to clarity, but a difficult path to get back to clarity. He almost had a correct answer in there, but it really does feel like a cop-out. He wanted to have a gross, distressing scene on the screen, so he decided to go for it, instead of, actually having a basis in reality. And not to mention, if he really is just trying to say that he wanted a rape scene in there just because rape happens in the real world, with real armies and military, okay, you didn't have to say it in such a way that implicates all of human history into rape. Because last time I checked, that word has a certain connotation that doesn't quite go along with the narrative you're spinning. Unless your narrative is to paint all of human history as morally horrendous. Now, if I was going to defend the scene, I would probably have used the historical excuse as well, saying that, well, I'm trying to show what the real world looks like, and this is it. This is the real world. That's what we've got. That's what we're looking at. That's what I probably would have said. I don't think I would have said we're all products of rape, though. Now, when asked about Disney's reaction to the scene, Gilroy says he didn't get any studio pushback. No one ever said anything about it, ever, Gilroy said, but I mean, we have limits on what we can do. We are very aware of what we can do sexually and violence-wise. Those limits are made very clear. Biggs has had a particularly brutal journey on the show so far, having already been captured and tortured by the Imperial Security Bureau during Season 1 and experiencing an experience which has left her traumatized. I feel like we're looking at someone who's projecting a little bit more than somebody who's trying to tell the truth of the world, though. Now, this is something from Hollywood Reporter that kind of shocked me, is who they decided to feature. This Star Wars fan account, you guys want to know who it is? It's everyone's favorite Star Wars theory, in which he goes on to say that sexual assault in Star Wars feels unnecessary. You can portray power dynamics and making the audience hate the Empire in other ways without taking it to such a disgusting place. Vader wouldn't tolerate that shit, nor does the Empire condone it. It has no place in Star Wars, period. Unnecessary. Now, I partially agree, but I do honestly disagree. You mean to tell me sexual assault has no place in Star Wars, when in episode 6 we saw what happened in Jabba's palace? You mean to tell me those girls weren't sexually assaulted, weren't being there? I mean, they were literally sex slaves. Leia and the Twi'leks, all that were there, they're all sex slaves. That's the point of them being there, is to be ogled and probably touched. Now, it's very different to the Andor scene we were given. I will totally agree there. And more importantly, it wasn't the Empire who's supposed to be a strong law and order community, but instead it was the disgusting hive of scum and villainy over on Tatooine in the Hutt's palace, which was run by Jabba the Hutt with the Sarlacc pit and whatnot. It was a place for bounty hunters and shitheads and drug dealers to gather. It was not a place of order or galactic control. So I agree that there's probably very little chance that Vader would condone this kind of activity from stormtroopers or the Imperials, though that doesn't exactly mean that they wouldn't do it. I also have to disagree with the notion that this doesn't belong in Star Wars, because we've had things of a similar nature. What doesn't belong in Star Wars is the sheer level of bluntness being used to describe it. If this was really Star Wars, she wouldn't be screaming rape. It would be hinted at. It would be suggested. There's no reason that the character should be out here screaming about this, because that's taking it away from the more subtle nature that Star Wars has always hidden these overtly sexual themes with. In Star Wars, it's all been very much more implied. Well, another fan account was one of many that praised the move and or dared to go to the darkest places Star Wars could offer. An Imperial officer abusing his untouchable status to rape an undocumented migrant, while his troops are rounding up the other undocumented citizens. Okay, you can't be undocumented and a citizen, you goddamn retard. This is the real world seeping into Star Wars storytelling. This is the world we live in, reflected in the galaxy far, far away. This is Star Wars at its most political, its most potent, its most frightening. I must commend the writing team's bravery to not shy away from such topics, to depict fascist regimes as they are, speaking the word rape directly into the camera, show just how despicable fascists really are. Andor is as brilliant as it is terrifying. Wow, you made the show a lot worse. Look at here, we have a major level tourist who doesn't give two shakes of a rat's ass about Star Wars and instead wants Star Wars to just be a Hamas documentary. This person isn't interested in a galaxy far, far away. They're interested in this galaxy. Their center of concern is explicitly local, and they demand everything else be representative of that because they can't think 2 inches away from their own face. Well, I think Star Wars theory is being too defensive. This is being far too permissive. And that's the problem. This show isn't really escapist. Star Wars is explicitly escapism, and I'm not saying you can't have darker or more serious things in Star Wars. I'm perfectly okay with that. In fact, one of my bigger criticisms is how Star Wars has seemed to avoid growing up at times when it probably should have, especially the sequel trilogy refusing to have any kind of edge whatsoever. It's like people have forgotten what the original trilogy actually was. A series made for everyone, not a series made for kids. Yes, kids were allowed to enjoy it, but the themes and topics of the movies were a bit higher brow than that of your average children's movie. Now, Fanapulse offers some more very good criticism of this act. The portrayal of sexual assault is not uncommon to Star Wars. George Lucas depicts it in Return of the Jedi when Jabba the Hutt attacked his Twi'lek slave Ula. After Ula began to resist him, he activated his trapdoor and watched gleefully as the Rancor feasted on her. Jabba would replace Ula with Princess Leia after she was captured attempting to free Han Solo. Leia would eventually kill him by strangulation with the chains that enslaved her when Luke Skywalker and Lando Calrissian enacted their plan to free Solo before he was to be fed to the Sarlacc pit. Just the scene I mentioned earlier. If you really want me to believe that there was nothing like sexual assault going on, you're high. If you really try to tell me that sexual assault has never once been depicted in a Star Wars movie, just as Qui-Gon once said, the ability to speak does not mean intelligence. Now, as far as Gilroy's idea that he needed to include this scene because armies in power throughout history committed rape, it's ridiculous on its face, especially since the scene he chose to have it depicted in is not one of a conquering army pillaging and raping a city as he implies. Rather, he depicts Imperial officers conducting an audit on an agricultural planet. This has nothing to do with the act of an army. This isn't an army opting to act in a barbaric way. This is a single commanding officer who's not in charge of an army, but in charge of ensuring immigration policies are followed, something that has never been a part of Star Wars. And like I said earlier, just making it all about contemporary politics. Now, this absolute bastardization of how the Star Wars world has always worked is explained a lot by a little bit of stuff admitted by the creator himself. The Andor creator previously stated that he's not a fan of Star Wars, and has admitted to relying on Wikipedia to learn the lore. Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with using Wikipedia because of how expansive the lore is if you want to double check, but while I understand why somebody might make a Star Wars movie when they're not a fan, at some point you have to bring people who are. And it's clear that the fact he's not a fan is exactly why he's making something that doesn't feel like Star Wars. I personally didn't watch Andor because I don't give a shit. But from what I hear from people, Andor is a decent enough show that isn't Star Wars. It's just a generic sci-fi grunge show and has nothing to do with Star Wars. And that makes sense when you understand the fact that the creator doesn't like Star Wars. In one interview, he even remarked you should be able to watch the show and not give a shit about Star Wars ever, or have ever seen any Star Wars. His outsider perspective has undeniably shaped Andor's tone, but it may also explain the jarring departure from the core tenets that defined the franchise under George Lucas. The real issue may not be the scene itself, but what its approval signifies. Gilroy admits there was almost zero resistance from Disney despite the fact that Star Wars, until recently, maintained an almost mythic separation from real-world horrors of this nature. Fans are left wondering where are the limits now, and who decides when a fictional universe designed to inspire wonder crosses over into something far more disturbing. Now, we need to be careful not to deify the original Star Wars trilogy, because it did frequently draw on some real-world things, mostly for props, but a lot of real-world ideas were put into the original trilogy. Problem is, not these real-world ideas. It's taking it too far. It's taking it a little bit too far, I agree. And the problem is it's all because this guy doesn't understand anything about Star Wars. Gilroy doesn't get Star Wars. He doesn't like it, and that's why it doesn't resemble it. I mean, even as the trailer plays behind me, can you really tell me that this looks like Star Wars? Yeah, we've got stormtroopers, and we've got vaguely Star Wars-shaped ships, but it's so sanitized. The grain you can almost see, and not because you're supposed to, but because of some stylistic choice. The coloring is so monotone, darkened down, and glum that I really cannot fathom how somebody looked at this and said, yeah, this is Star Wars to me. It's clear that Gilroy doesn't like Star Wars, let alone isn't a fan, and it just comes through in every single portion about it. And the worst part about that is the direction Gilroy is taking it in is the only direction anyone is bothering to watch, which means it's the one that Disney Plus is going to continue to emulate. But that's pretty much all I've got. Let me know down in the comments, do you guys think that this scene was taking it a step too far? Do you think this scene had nothing to do with in Star Wars whatsoever? Or maybe you think sexual assault has nothing to do with Star Wars? Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about it, and I will see you guys on the next one.